We will spend quite a bit of time exploring this idea of values and structures and practices. A key component of this program will be for you to spend time reflecting on what are the core values of your life. All of us have values, but chances are we don't spend much time thinking about them. They are like the air we breathe. We take them for granted and are seldom conscious of how important values are and how our values determine so many aspects of our life. As we delve more deeply into Benedictine spirituality and how it applies to modern people outside of monasteries, we see how Benedict identified key values and how he created structures and practices to allow his monks to live out their most important values. We also need to keep in mind that this schema of structures and values is necessarily artificial. Benedict probably never sat down and divided the chapters of the rule into structures or values. It is simply a better way to understand how we can live a monastic life. Early in the program, we looked at the idea of the goal of the spiritual journey, especially as expressed in the idea of purity of heart. It is clear that monasticism is about growing in relationship to God, making progress on the spiritual journey. Perhaps these ideas of progress can be summed up as transformation. We are all made in the image of God, and in this life we seek to come to a fuller expression of that reality. We grow in love for God, for one another, for ourselves, and are transformed into the image of God revealed in Christ. So if the core value, indeed the purpose of monastic life is transformation, then how do we live out that value? In other words, what structures help us to come to transformation? On the one hand, we can say that all aspects of monasticism are about transformation, but here we are going to focus on one core structure, accountability. Accountability is the way in which we become responsible for our idealism, our desire to live out our values. We may have all the desire in the world to live a whole and wholly transformed life, but chances are, without some form of accountability, we may not get very far. It is also critical at this point to be careful how we define accountability. For many of us, accountability immediately summons up images of ruler-wielding teachers or poor performance reviews. Accountability can easily have a negative connotation. Many of us are prone to easily feeling guilty about things we've done or haven't done. And indeed, monasticism has earned a reputation over the centuries for focusing on penance, on being a way of life focused on atoning for sins. The reality, though, is that most of us do not have a lot to atone for. Most of us struggle more with the need to be better people than grappling with the evil things we have done in our lives. For that reason, it is probably more helpful to talk about accountability in terms of support. Most of us sincerely want to grow in our relationship to God. We want to be more loving people. So how do we get the support we need in our desire to live out our monastic values? How do we support one another to be accountable in our desire to grow, to be transformed? Just as we say that God's love is unconditional, how do we mirror a similar support and encouragement as we develop structures of accountability in our lives? Let's take a look at some examples of how Benedict supported his monks in their common goal of transformation, how he called them to accountability. When people first read the Rule of Benedict, one of the things they are frequently struck by is the amount of time spent on what scholars sometimes call the penal code. This refers to several chapters of the rule with terms like excommunication and faults in their titles. At first glance, it looks like Benedict is a harsh taskmaster who spends a lot of time worrying about the punishment of erring monks. On closer examination, the reality is quite different. If we dig a little deeper, we see a leader who understands how hard and how important it is to call people to become their best selves. and we see someone who knows that transformation in the monastic way of life requires a balance of challenge and support. Benedict's attitude toward correction and accountability is based on several key assumptions and understandings from his culture. The first is that Benedict came from a culture that was intensely communal. As modern Americans, this is a mindset that is foreign to us. Our heritage is rugged individualism. We celebrate being able to do anything we want to do without worrying about anyone else. We treasure our freedom, our solitude, our uniqueness. Having a strong sense of group identity, of belonging to a group of people who strongly shape our self-understanding, is unusual in our society. In Benedict's society, on the other hand, being part of a group was fundamental to who they were. Indeed, individualism is largely a product of modern history. Benedict's monks, like other people in late antiquity, identified themselves with the group, whether family, ethnic group, tribal group, faith group, etc. People in this time did not think of their own needs and identity first, but were other-directed rather than self-directed. Their sense of self was determined by the group and not their own feelings. For this reason, when Benedict is concerned about some kind of inappropriate behavior, his way of dealing with it is to take people away from the group. If someone is engaged in behavior that hurts the group, then they undergo punishments such as being excluded from eating their meals with the group. They are excluded from participating in the group prayers or other activities. In other words, the punishment for not living up to the standards of the group is to be excluded from the group. Today, in our individualistic society, being excluded from the group is not a punishment. For many people, it may be seen as a relief. So when we look at the rule, we have to do quite a bit of translating so that we can adapt the ideas of support and accountability to our own culture. For Benedict, the emphasis on community was part of his predominant culture, and his way of monastic life challenged the predominant culture of his own time in other ways. In our culture, on the other hand, an emphasis on community is very countercultural, and we have to be consciously aware of how we live out community as a value and a structure. To be monastic is to say we cannot go it alone, that our faith journey relies on other people, and that we support one another on our journey to know God more deeply. If we embrace community as a value, then we have to begin to say that we must be accountable to our community for our actions and attitudes. A key precept of Benedict's rule is that there are consequences to our actions. To say that there are consequences to our actions can be a difficult idea to live out in concrete ways. We don't like being called to account, and generally we don't like to do it to others. But ultimately, if there are no consequences, then we will not be challenged or encouraged to grow and change. All of us are creatures of habit. We tend to repeat the same behavior over and over. Our attitudes tend to quickly become ingrained. When we begin to see ourselves as part of a community, as being responsible for one another and to one another, then our failure to help a community member to grow becomes something that brings down the whole group. For Benedict, the point of challenging people, of setting concrete consequences for their actions, was not punishment for the sake of punishment, but to allow people to change, to reform, to develop greater insight so that they could be re-included into the community. This is a crucial test when we begin to call anyone on their actions or attitudes. We need to ask ourselves about our motivation in confronting someone. Are we challenging them out of our own anger or irritation, or because we are willing to put the needs of the other person first by doing the difficult work of gently helping them to see where they need to grow? Similarly, When we fail to confront unhealthy behavior or attitudes, are we motivated by a dislike of confrontation? If we fail to challenge dysfunctional attitudes or behavior, are we really doing a disservice to the individual in question? Let's look at how the rule treats this issue. In chapter 23, entitled Excommunication for Faults, Benedict says, "If a brother is found to be stubborn or disobedient or proud, if he grumbles or in any way despises the holy rule and defies the orders of his seniors, he should be warned twice privately by the seniors in accord with our Lord's injunction. If he does not amend, he must be rebuked publicly in the presence of everyone. But if even then he does not reform, let him be excommunicated, provided that he understands the nature of this punishment." There's a lot going on in this short chapter. First, we need to be clear on what excommunication consists of. The punishment for faults consisted of being excluded from the common table for meals, and the monk cannot lead a psalm or refrain during the common prayer. If an offense is more serious, then the community is enjoined to not interact with the monk until he has made satisfaction. So the punishment is to be excluded from the common life, and everything about the punishment is about trying to reincorporate the monk into the community. We then need to look at the reasons for the excommunication. Benedict mentions stubbornness, disobedience, pride, grumbling, despising the rule, defying the orders of the seniors. In other words, he is talking about someone we would say has a serious attitude problem. The monk is being excluded from the group because his actions and behaviors are seriously destructive to the morale and health of the entire community. Most of us have had enough life experience that we have seen this kind of thing in groups. All it takes is one person with a poisonous attitude to wreak havoc in a group. People who are prone to negative talk, who refuse to cooperate or listen to others, who think they are better than others, who willfully refuse to work towards the common good, are people whose presence can quickly undermine a workplace, a church, a group. These kinds of attitudes have a cancerous effect on a group of people trying to work together toward a common goal. So how does Benedict handle these people? If we have been in any kind of group where we have experienced this kind of behavior, we may want to say that Benedict should just immediately tell them to leave community. But that isn't what he does. The process for dealing with seriously disruptive behavior is very gentle, patient, and mindful of the feelings of the monk in question. Benedict has his seniors warn the monk twice in private. The person causing problems is called to account by people who have had substantial experience in community. This is a theme in the rule. When there are problems, they are handled by the people who have the life experience and wisdom to know how to handle things with tact and delicacy. The monk is counseled by others who have dealt with their own struggles, their own issues, who have had to change their own attitudes. And this is done in private. We would take this for granted, but in a communal culture that largely relied on public shaming to change behavior, Benedict is very aware of the feelings and needs of the individual. The individual is given multiple chances to see how her behavior is affecting the group, how it is incompatible with the ideals of the monastery, and how it needs to be changed. The consequences of the inappropriate behavior then gradually escalate. The next step is that the person is rebuked in public. Negative behavior that affects the community is finally dealt with in the context of the whole community. Only then, after multiple warnings, is the person excluded from the common table and common life. Let's look at another chapter that carries this theme even further. In chapter 27, the abbot's concern for the excommunicated we read, "The abbot must exercise the utmost care and concern for wayward brothers, because it is not the healthy who need a physician, but the sick. Therefore he ought to use every skill of a wise physician, and send in synpectae, that is, mature and wise brothers, who, under the cloak of secrecy, may support the wavering brother, urge him to be humble as a way of making satisfaction, and console him lest he be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. Rather, as the apostle also says, let love for him be reaffirmed, and let all pray for him." Here again we see clearly that the concern of the rule, the abbot, and the whole community is about healing and restoration of right relationships. It is not about punishment or criticism or making anyone feel bad. We see in the chapter a very modern idea that people who are misbehaving or causing problems are not bad or malicious people. They have a condition that requires treatment by a physician. The person needs healing, support, consolation, prayer. Even by modern standards, this is substantially different than how we normally treat people who are causing problems in a group. There is a deep attitude of care, of wanting the person to come to a point where they are able to see how their attitudes and behavior have caused problems and how they can change things. So what we see is an example of a well-thought-out, clear, supportive, and effective structure to deal with disruptive attitudes or behaviors. This is key. It is never enough to simply say that someone is having a negative effect on community. It is never enough to hope that the person will change, or that someone should do something about the problem. Benedict has created a process, a structure, to call people to accountability and to support them in their need for change. He does so in a manner that is humane, gentle, respectful, and yet creates clear consequences for unacceptable behavior. Perhaps all of this still begs the question of what this has to do with people who are not living inside a 6th century monastery, who don't have a common table to be excommunicated from, nor any wise elders to support them. The reality is that we will all be the difficult person at various points in our lives. We will all be stubborn or disobedient or proud or grumbling or any number of other things. And more importantly, all of us will be the person in need of a physician at times. No one wakes up in the morning and decides to be difficult. No one entered Benedict's monastery with the intention of being a bad monk. We are all struggling with any number of issues that make it hard for us to be the person we want to be. We all experience times when we are overwhelmed with fear or anger or lethargy or anxiety or any number of things that hold us back. On occasion, all of us will be in need of one of Benedict's synpectae, the wise elder who will support and console us lest we become overwhelmed with sorrow. And more importantly, each of us will sometimes be the synpectae for one another. When we are struggling, doubting, clueless, or tired, there are other people in our community who will be there for us. We are accountable to one another as a way of helping one another stay on the path, stay faithful to the journey. This is a key structure of Benedictine life, how we stay accountable by supporting one another. And the whole point of the support is so that we come to the reality of transformation. We make this monastic journey together, and together we come to know what Jesus meant when he said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God."